Here's hoping that Clone High creates another wave of Egyptomania. Happy 20s and welcome back to my channel. If you are a subscriber, hello again, it is lovely to have you here. Thank you for the support. We just hit a milestone, so stay tuned for a live stream soon on this channel. If you are new here, hello, welcome. It is lovely to have you here. My name is Marie, and I hope you enjoyed today's video and perhaps subscribe. Without further ado, let's get started. The 1920s was undoubtedly an era of innovation. However, that doesn't mean that they didn't look to the past for inspiration. While the 20s certainly had advancements in art, sciences, music, they also were quite obsessed with the past, specifically ancient Egypt. And this obsession was known as Egyptomania or Tutmania, after King Tutankhamun. While renewed interest in ancient Egypt had actually begun in the teens, look at Theda Bara's film Cleopatra, it didn't really become full-blown until the discovery of King Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 by archaeologist Howard Carter, and it was funded by Lord Carnarvon. Try saying that 3 times fast. This discovery impacted culture, arts, and sciences in the 20s and the 30s deeply, and it still impacts us today, more than we think it does. Ancient Egyptian influence can most notably be found in the fashion of the 20s. Take a look at some of these dresses from the 20s, and they certainly have a very Egyptian influence on them. The sheath dresses that were discovered in ancient Egypt were repurposed into beaded gowns of the 1920s, and ancient Egyptian dresses and 20s dresses actually have a very similar shape to them. 1920s accessories were also deeply influenced by the accessories of ancient Egypt. Look at these side-by-sides of an ancient Egyptian headdress and a 1920s headdress for a theater production. You can see right here that these are 1920s jewelry pieces that have the color scheme and symbols of ancient Egypt on them. Popular motifs in 1920s fabric and jewelry were actually scarabs, lotus flowers, snakes, and falcons, and these were all typical of ancient Egyptian work. Egyptomania was so widespread in 1920s fashion that even Art Deco masters such as Arte were heavily influenced by ancient Egyptian fashion, and they created their own version of ancient Egyptian fashion. And speaking of Art Deco, I do want to talk about the Art Deco movement and how it was inspired by ancient Egypt. Look at the precise angles of Art Deco and the color scheme, and tell me it doesn't remind you of ancient Egypt. The ancient Egyptians also used sharp angles and similar color schemes in their architecture. Egyptomania also became huge in advertising. Just take a look at these 1920s advertisements for soap of all things. Yeah. Now before we continue, I do want to touch on the subject of cultural appropriation, as basically what the 20s did with ancient Egyptian work was cultural appropriation. And as we get more into the video, you'll see that a lot of their depictions of ancient Egyptians were very much not okay and were racist. But again, this video wasn't made to excuse anyone's blatant cultural appropriation of the ancient Egyptians. However, the 1920s' Egyptomania didn't just stop at the fashion and jewelry and accessories of the era. No, in fact, it bled into music, and there are many 1920s compositions inspired by ancient Egypt, and they used a scale that sounded exotic, when in reality that scale probably had nothing to do with ancient Egyptian music. Songs such as Old King Tut by Harry von Tilzer and Cleopatra became standards throughout the decade and are still utilized today by freshmen who are auditioning for musical theater programs. I have heard more poor renditions of Cleopatra than I care to. Please stop singing it. There are so many wonderful standards that don't involve racist and offensive stereotypes. Even the scientific realm was heavily impacted by Egyptomania. Egyptomania created an entire new generation of archaeologists, scholars, historians, costume historians who were so interested in learning more about this culture. And that certainly has impacted us until today. We still are learning things about ancient Egypt and other ancient civilizations. While Egyptomania is best attributed to the 1920s because that was the biggest wave of Egyptomania, it wasn't the first time Egyptomania happened or the last time. An earlier wave of Egyptomania was actually recorded in the late 18th and early 19th centuries during Napoleon's campaign for North Africa. This campaign caused an obsession among the French with ancient Egypt. A later example of Egyptomania actually happened in the late 90s and the early 2000s, which some of us may have been alive for and some of us actually remember. This wave of Egyptomania was caused by the King Tut International Exhibition. I actually remember the King Tut exhibition coming to LACMA, which is the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, in 2004, 2005, I don't know, I was very young, but I do remember it. I did not attend the exhibition because I was terrified of seeing a live mummy. I have seen a live mummy now, I'm still kind of terrified by it. This exhibition also caused a wave of Egyptomania. While it was nowhere nearly as large as the 1920s is, we did have some fashion collections that were inspired by ancient Egypt, and the Mummy movies with Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz were actually also inspired by this renewed interest in ancient Egypt. However, the 20s takes the cake on how big Egyptomania was. Along with tangible examples of 20s Egyptomania, we also have some superstitions born during this era of ancient Egypt that still linger with us today. Anybody ever heard of the Curse of the Mummy? It was born in the 1920s. If you're not familiar with the Curse of the Mummy, it's fine. It basically states that death and woe will befall anybody who opens a pharaoh's tomb. This superstition was actually caused by Lord Carnarvon's, I will never be able to say that name right, death shortly after discovering King Tut's tomb. Upon news of Carnarvon's death, people went wild. 6 of the 26 people who were also present at this discovery died within the decade as well. So this only fueled the superstition more. However, Lord Carnarvon's death wasn't actually that mystical. He died of blood poisoning, and while scientists of the time actually thought that this blood poisoning was caused by some bacteria or toxin that was in the tomb, recent scientific studies show that that probably wasn't the case, and his blood poisoning was completely unrelated. So do I personally believe in the Curse of the Mummy? No, I don't. But it's a very interesting superstition that still lingers today. The Curse of the Mummy is very popular in media that revolves around ancient Egypt. I mean, even the Rugrats had an episode about it, which is kind of crazy to think about. I am going to discuss this Curse of the Mummy and its impact on media in another video because we're kicking off spooky season, so why not? So if you're interested in that, subscribe. The ancient Egyptians were a rich culture that made many advancements that are still utilized today. Without them, we would not be at the point that we are now in math, science, or art. And while I personally don't think that another wave of Egyptomania will ever be as big as the 1920s is, or perhaps as culturally insensitive, I certainly believe that there will be a renewed interest in ancient Egypt once more. And that is it for today's video. If you enjoyed today's video, please leave a big thumbs up, subscribe, and turn the notification bell on. If you would like to see more of my sweaty, poorly lit face, please consider following me on TikTok and on Instagram. I post on TikTok 5 times a week, and I do live streams every Monday and Friday, and I post on Instagram whenever I want. If you would like to see more exclusive behind the scenes content, including sewing lessons and an analysis on a 20s ancient Egypt inspired dress, consider supporting me on Patreon. Videos like this are made possible by my current patrons. I will leave my link tree with all of the links to all of those handles down below in the description box. Next week kicks off spooky season here on my channel. That's right, an entire month of spooky themed videos and Halloween themed videos. So if you're interested in that, again, subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have an amazing week, and I will see you next time. Bye!